appreciate it, really do.
This is really a wonderful serendipitous thing that just happened. Anyway, my name is Lorna Goodison, and I've written a book called From Harvey River, a memoir of my mother and her people. It's published by HarperCollins Amistad in the US. It was published in Canada before, that's why I mentioned that. This book really is, it took me 12 years from start to finish. The writing of this book took a long time, as I said, 12 years. And it really began, I think, as a poem, because I'm a poet. I first became, I first made my name as a poet. And it began perhaps as the title of my second collection of poetry, which is called I Am Becoming My Mother. And the poem says, my mother raises rare blooms and she waters them with tea. Her birth waters sang like rivers, my mother is now me. My mother had a linen dress the color of the sky and stored lace and damask tablecloths to pull shame out of her eye. And I'm becoming my mother, who was a brown yellow woman, fingers smelling always of onions. And I wrote that poem, it was published first in 1986, but I think it began a process of, trying to reconstruct my mother's life, which ended up in this book, From Harvey River. And I'd like to read to you from the very first chapter. And it describes the birth of my mother. The baby was plump and pretty as a ripe ox-heart tomato. Her mother, Margaret Wilson Harvey, gently squeezed the soft cheeks to open the tiny mouth and rubbed her little finger, which had been dipped in sugar, back and forth, over and under the small tongue to anoint the child with a gift of sweet speech. Her name is Doris, she said to her husband, David. In later years, my mother preferred to spell her name D-O-R-I-C-E, though in actual fact she was christened D-O-R-I-S. But she was registered under a different name altogether, Clara Bell. This came about because of a disagreement between her parents as to what they should call their seventh child. Her father, David, was a romantic and a dreamer, a man who loved music and books and an avid reader of a lesser-known 19th century authors. He had read a story in which a heroine was called Clara Bell, and he found it to be a lovely and fitting name. He told his wife Margaret that that was to be the baby girl's name. Well, Margaret had her heart set on Doris, because it was the name of a school friend of hers, a real person, not some made-up somebody who lived in a book. Doris Louise, that is what the child would be called. They argued over it, and after a while it became clear that Margaret was not going to let David best her this time. He had given their other children's names like Cleodine, Albertha, Edmund, and Flavius. Lofty-sounding names which were rapidly hacked down to size by the blunt tongues of Hanover people. Cleo, Bertha, Eddie, and Flavie. That was what remained of those names when Hanover people finished with them. Margaret had managed to name her firstborn son Howard, and her father had named Rose. Simple names for real people. But there was nobody who could be as stubborn and hard-hearted as Margaret when she set her mind to something. She was determined that the baby was not going to be called Clara Bell. Sound like a blasted cow name, she said. David gave up arguing with his wife about the business of naming the pretty-faced, chubby little girl, especially after Margaret reminded him graphically of who exactly had endured the necessary hard and bloody labor to bring the child into the world. He dutifully accompanied her to church and christened her Doris on the last Sunday in June 1910. Then the next day he rode into the town of Lucy and registered the child as Clara Bell Louise Harvey. And he never told anybody about this deed for 15 years. As a matter of fact, he is not known to have ever told anyone about it, because the family only found out when my mother tried to sit for her first Jamaica local exams, for which she needed her birth certificate. When they went to the registrar of births and deaths, they told her that there was no Doris Louise Harvey on record, but that there was a Clara Bell Louise Harvey, born to David and Margaret Harvey, née Wilson, of Harvey River, Hanover. She burst into tears when she heard what her real name was. Clara Bell, go to hell, her brothers chanted when the terrible truth was revealed. Not one to take teasing lightly, she told them to go to hell their damn selves. Eventually her name was converted by deed poll to Doris. and thereafter she signed her name D-O-R-I-C-E, Doris, as if to distance herself from the whole Clarabelle Doris business. Besides, Doris